Good afternoon, everybody. This is the afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Saltzman? Wheeler?
Here. Carla, could you please read items 1146 through 1148?
1146, adopt the Central City 2035 plan, amend the comprehensive plan map, transportation system plan, Willamette Greenway plan, Willamette River Greenway inventory, scenic resources protection plan, zoning map and Title 33, repeal and replace prior Central City plans and documents. 1147, adopt the Central City 2035 plan action charts, performance targets, and urban design diagrams. At 1148, adopt the Central City 2035 plan Green Loop concept report.
Today's session is a continuation of the Central City 35 matter. As you recall, we held hearings and took public testimony on September 7th, September 14th, and September 20th. There is no public testimony today. Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you, Mayor. Since one of the things that we're discussing today is the potential conflicts of interest for one of the advisory committees, I do need to state on the record that I am the co-owner of a condominium at Northwest Flanders and 8th. There are 27 other co-owners, and I think the likelihood of them wanting to do anything to their building in terms of demolishing and rebuilding are slim to none. And that particular property is looked to be down to have less height. So I'm going to continue to participate, but I did just want to say that on the record, that I certainly know the area very well because I visit my son and daughter-in-law quite a lot.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Today we're going to discuss items of interest to council members and decide if we want to consider amendments, if amendments are not already on the table. The topics that we have on today's list are the following. First, the West Quadrant SAC property ownership. Second, the height and FAR. Third, scenic views. Fourth, the transportation system plan. Fifth, zoning and use allowances. And sixth, green buildings. So here's how staff and I propose that this work. The staff will come up, they'll introduce the topic. That will include the following for each of these items: some background, any proposed amendment, and if there's handouts or PowerPoints, that'll be the appropriate time for that. We'll identify which council member or council members asked that these issues be discussed, and then we'll give the commissioner who requested the item to be on the agenda the first shot at beginning the discussion. After the council has had a chance to ask questions and hold a discussion, I'll call the question and I'll ask if there's the desire to put forward an amendment related to this topic. If there's no amendment proposed after the discussion, because some of these amendments were put on the table for discussion purposes, and after all the testimony and the discussion, the commissioner may wish to withdraw the amendment. So if there's no amendment, I'll move on to the next item. Just to be clear, so if there's no second on an item, the proposed amendment will not be part of the amendment package that will be heard on January 18th. And at the very tag end of our meeting, staff is going to confirm the items that will be the subject of the hearing on January 18th, and any items that we'll return to for more discussion on November 2nd or December 6th. Does that make sense to folks? Very good. And if you didn't follow that, don't worry about it. The staff is well prepped, and they'll guide us through this. Joe, can you kick things off with a overview of the height and FAR in the central city? And as per usual, if people could just identify themselves for the record. That's always helpful.
So we're
Thank
starting
you.
with height?
Your overview. Yeah.
Yes. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor. I'm Joe Zender, Chief Planner for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. The first item, since so much of what we're going to talk about today are amendments or issues related to maximum building heights and floor area ratios in the central city, I wanted to do just a quick overview of what those are about and how we treat them in the plan. And I'm going to use a few slides to do that.
Joe, we don't see any of these slides.
Oh, there they go.
Joe, now we see these slides.
Okay, thank you.
We can see that there are slides, we can't actually read
Right,
what's on
this
them.
We see them this morning, so there's something miraculous.
Yeah, this set is not so consequential, but you have a lot of important slides to look at today that are going to help you with your decisions. So, Central City Heights. This just shows you, before the 1980s Central City Plan, our heights in the Central City were pretty liberal. 460 feet was sort of the norm, and with the 88 plan, we started to move into a regime that's more close to what we have today, which is that we use where we allow greater building heights for specific policy purposes, and that's part of what I'm going to explain today. Second, it's really important as we talk about heights in the central city to understand that we're applying a system of maximum building heights on a very unique situation of these 200-foot by 200-foot blocks. That's really small for an American city. It's 200 feet by 200 feet that doesn't have an alley either. So the development of that block is pretty tricky. All the loading, all the access, everything is around the perimeter of that lot. We incorporate extra height into our maximum heights to allow flexibility to work around some of the challenges that causes. Third, I wanted to point out the way we do maximum building heights also works hand in hand with floor area ratios. And floor area ratio, right, is the system by which we calculate how many square feet of development you can put on a site. So this slide you're looking at is sort of a typical 400-foot or 200-foot by 200-foot central city block. The way floor area ratio works is you take the square foot of feet of that size of that site and multiply it by the ratio, and that's how much you get to build. And so the sort of the lower corner where the site is built out with a complete block is often or possibly how that looks like. But part of the reason for adding height is to allow buildings to be designed in a variety of ways and still accomplish the amount of development that we want to see in the central city, that total floor area ratio and its plus bonuses these days. You can use it in situations where you're trying to preserve part of the site and build around it and still get your square feet on there. You can use it in situations where you're trying to not just preserve part of the site, but use part of the site for a lower intensive use like a plaza and go up even higher. And you could use it just because of the business purposes of that's your the type of building that you're trying to build. So the two work together. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about there's sort of 9 principles, there's 9 considerations that you're going to see in these discussions of height. Where do we allow more height in the central city? Typically, and you'll see it, we use it to where we want to have the most development. FAR, the floor area, and the height goes hand in hand. For policy purposes, we've always put that in the downtown, and along our transit mall because we're trying to maximize close access and business support, use support for the transit mall. Secondly, we make sure that our height works with the amount of floor area, the amount of square feet that we want in a different part of the central city. Third, and this is something that we've introduced with, or emphasized in this plan, that we want to provide extra height to provide flexibility for both the design of our buildings, that you don't have to just extrude up a solid block. You have the ability to go with more smaller floor plates, and so do some architecture as you go higher. And you have the ability to work with some really complicated sites. For instance, the one we'll talk about today are the bridgeheads that are, have constraints due to ramps and the like. In this plan, in this version, you're going to see that we only allow more heights in return for a bonus. So our new system, wherever we're raising height, that's only achievable by accessing it through one of our Central City bonuses. So where do you see lower heights or moves to lower heights in the Central City? We use them first to preserve the character of historic districts. You're going to see that today. Old Town Chinatown, Grand Avenue are two examples we're going to talk about today. We lower heights to protect designated views. You're going to see a number of cases of that today. We use it to reduce shadows on parks and open spaces. This is part of actually the origins of our tradition of step down to the river. And we use it as a transition to neighborhoods. So on the edges of the Central City, today I think we're talking about southeast 12th. We tend to taper down the heights there so that you can create a transition. So this map that you're seeing is sort of a summary of where we've increased and decreased heights as part of this plan. The orange are height increases. The blue are height decreases. And there's a couple of situations, I think these are green on the centrally side, where because it was industrial in the past, you don't even have maximum heights. Industrial zones, you can just build. So we've put those on there. So that's the universe of changes that we're going to be talking about today. And when we get to that section of those amendments, we'll walk through them. Any questions on this background? Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Very good, and I'm sorry, I should have, are we moving on to the first item? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So the first item is item A. This is the West Quadrant advisory, the SAC property ownership issue. So I'll turn it over to you now. Sorry.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So now that you have that background that Joe just provided to you, we'd like to report on some of the work we did in response to Commissioner Fritz's request related to the West Quadrant SAC, Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So just briefly, for those of you who are new to City Council, we started the Central City planning process by developing some overall policy guidance and then 3 high-level plans for different Central City geographies. And those are listed on the screen before you. Each of these groups had a committee that advised BPS staff, and the committees were comprised of people who had some sort of stake in the outcome, like advocates for affordable housing, neighborhood interests, environmental interests, and of course, property owners, business owners, and people who work in the area. So each group reviewed and discussed drafts and concepts that staff developed, but staff produced the final products that went to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. So after the quadrant processes, we worked on a number of additional studies that included a scenic resource inventory that led to all the scenic view work that you have before you. We did a bonus and transfer study that started our work on prioritizing the affordable housing bonus. And those materials and implementation strategies developed as part of that were not part of any of the quadrant planning work committees. So once all the processes that I just described were complete, staff began to integrate it into an early version of the Central City 2035 draft that you have before you. So this screen just shows some background on the West Quadrant SAC, just the chronology of the different, the final meeting on July 2014, and outlines the, when the letter went to the ombudsman and the letter to the concerned Portlanders, and on 216 BPS requested after-the-fact disclosures from the various SAC members. So, and the next slide here shows kind of the summary of disclosure, and all of this material is in Volume 6 of the Central City Plan. So then 26 people filled out the form, some others did not, and some were more complete than others. So Commissioner Fritz asked us to prepare a map showing the West Quadrant SAC ownership, and that is what is on the screen, and that is what Carla just distributed to you today. And so while we got some specific information from the disclosure forms, the most information we got was derived from the Multnomah County tax data, sorted by the address to which the tax bill is sent. And so that's how we generated this, and then we checked it, compared it with the disclosure forms that we received. So the map on your screen is the same color palette as the one Joe just talked about, and so it builds off the blue and the oranges. Again, the light orange are height increases, light blue are height decreases, and when those colors are dark, so the dark orange are height increases that properties that are owned by SAC members. The dark blue are height decreases on properties owned by SAC members. There is also some cross-hatching on the map, and that comes from our buildable lands inventory that you may recall from our comprehensive plan process. So there are two different types of those. Some are vacant, underutilized, and some are non-vacant but considered underutilized lots. So what does this show? I guess it shows that height increases on the stakeholder advisory-owned properties are scattered around the West Quadrant. Some are height increases, some are decreases. Many of the increases are on properties that are not expected to redevelop over the next 20 years, the lifetime of this plan. In addition to the ones that are not crosshatched, there are a few that are actually under development right now, such as the one right next to the building that we work in, the 1900 building. So that's shown here as a BLI site, but it's actually under development right now. In some cases, you'll see that one particular block has half blue and half orange, and that's generally, if not always, because there's a height increase in that general area, but there's a view corridor that transects that area, so there's a decrease for that view corridor area. The other reason why the blue pattern is kind of complicated is that there are views from a variety of points, such as Washington Park, Terwilliger, and others, and they are views of Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, and that sort of thing. So they're crisscrossing all across the central city, which ends up with this kind of interesting pattern. So I think that's everything I had prepared.
Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, staff, for working on this so diligently. I know you've been putting a lot of work in. In fact, things continue to evolve up to the last minute. The map we have in front of us shows all of the height increases and decreases, as well as the ones from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So I also want to thank the community members who are here, even though there's no testimony, and those who raised concerns, and also the Ombudsman for writing her report. My intention is not to isolate individual property owners. I believe that since there has been the question about whether or not self-interest may have played any role in this, it really behooves us to look at the whole patterns and see where the patterns make sense and where they don't. One of the key ones that I think doesn't make sense is the small area around the Morrison Bridgehead, and we're going to have that as a separate amendment. What would be helpful to me before our next work session is if we could get the maps with the view sheds written in, because try as I might with the straight lines that are on here, I can't see why some properties are increased. You can see why they're decreased ones, but others are increased. And so I can't imagine what lines could be drawn that would make sense of what I'm seeing in the patterns of this map. So I apologize to council. I had hoped that we would be even further along than we are, but we have got the data now. Would that be acceptable if we can just tie this one over till next time?
Very good.
And let me just add, Commissioner, that now we have this data, the question that I will be interested in having my colleagues address is, as to any property that you've identified as potentially having a, let's call it a cloud over it, what's the position of staff in terms of the recommendation? Is there, on the merits, is there a reason to take the action that's been proposed? And if not, why not? And what's been the public testimony? I think it's important to identify these properties, but I think it's equally important to hear the arguments pro and con, whatever changes are proposed, because ultimately we get to look at this fresh. Whatever the advisory committees have done, we're the final actors. And my interest is in getting it right, and that is a balance of a lot of factors that frankly go well beyond the question of who owns the property. It goes to the question of what kind of community are we building, and is any recommendation on a particular site consistent with the various things that you put before us earlier, and if not, why not?
Very good. Any further discussion on this item before we move to the next topic? All right, Rachel, you're up next. We're moving on to height and FAR, and I have 5 proposed amendments there, but I'll let you start up.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I have a list here that, of 8 items, and those 8 items align with the items that were part of the agenda in your packet. So I'll be going through each of these today.
By the way, thanks for the cheat sheets you gave us, and thank you also for blowing it up so we can read it. Thank you for both.
So the first item here, Old Town Roseland Theater height area. Through public testimony, we received a proposal to restore the height on the Roseland Theater and the adjacent blocks between Southwest 5th, Broadway, and then from Burnside north to Everett. So it's that 6-block area that you see in the maps here. So the map on the right, on the left, is the recommended draft proposal, which was to lower heights in this area. The main reason being that the heights that were set and what exists today is 460 feet in this 6-block area. There was thinking that the commercial corridor would continue north, so Big Pink, and further south, that would continue north of Burnside. Part of the reason for staff's proposal to reduce the heights to a base of 250 and then an opportunity to get to 325 through bonuses was mostly, we didn't see that pattern unfold, that the commercial corridor just has not proceeded north in that way. So it was in an attempt to right-size heights in this area. We do have a lot of smaller blocks and buildings that have been built that some of them of historic resources. However, that we know that the site is also along the transit mall, and there is future development potential in this area. So the amendment to put forward, the mayor's amendment, is to restore heights in the 6-block area to the 460 feet that exists today, and that's shown in the map on the right-hand side.
How tall is the Big Pink?
Big Pink is 545 feet.
So 460 feet would be roughly 90% of the Big Pink.
That's correct.
And this would be, so we could have potentially 6 blocks that have buildings with roughly the same height of the Big Pink on this side of Burnside?
So that's the height envelope that's there today, and the way that we've set height, we set these height envelopes, and it offers a pattern within this area. We certainly wouldn't expect that every block would have a building of that height, mostly because the pattern that exists today, we have existing buildings. In order to consolidate a space of that size, it would be challenging to see that level of development on each of these blocks.
Okay.
So I was going to turn it over to the mayor
Yeah,
at
very
this
good.
point.
I mean, you did an excellent job of describing this, and I appreciate the process that we've set up today. This is actually very helpful for me, and I'm sure it's illustrative for.
Is this the appropriate point, if I want to support this amendment, to second it, or?
Yeah, sure, if you'd like.
Yeah, I would second this.
Great. That makes it easy. So I am sensitive to the fact that it is on the, it's adjacent to the historic district, and that was something I certainly considered. It's also on the Transit Mall, and as you know, this is obviously the central city, and it's the area where if we're going to seek density, it's the most appropriate place to locate it. It takes some of the pressure off of some of the established neighborhoods. So I appreciate Commissioner Saltzman seconding that amendment. I don't know if there's further discussion on this before I call the question. Commissioner Fish?
Yeah, I'm going to propose, Mayor, that we not actually take votes until we've gone through the whole package. And the reason is, I want to make sure that if, for example, you and Commissioner Saltzman put down a marker here about this site, I would like to see what our collective positions are on some sister amendments, and I'd like to see the whole. If we start doing it piecemeal, we could end up making either inconsistent decisions, or we might have to revisit. So if I might suggest, let's take the Part 1 amendments, let's go through them, see if there's a second, and then come back and vote on them after we have a chance to see the forest from the trees.
I think actually what's being proposed is as long as they're seconded, they move on till January
Okay,
for
very
public
good.
The
comment.
mayor was going to call a vote. I just.
I know,
Okay, great.
Yes, we just need a second.
Perfect.
And then
So
we'll keep it in that package.
That is seconded, so that amendment is now on the table.
Which
and
works
it'll be
great with me,
available for
because
further
I'd like to
discussion.
see the context
Good.
and not lock in piecemeal.
Very good, excellent. So we'll move on to the second item, the Old Town Roseland Theater.
Okay, so the next item is in Newtown, Chinatown, Japantown, within the historic district. And through public testimony, we received a proposal to restore height on the block highlighted in red on the left. And it's within the historic district, and the historic district is the area that is highlighted in green. But this is the block in question, I've highlighted in red for you. The existing heights.
I'm sorry, I'm lost. Which map are you looking at?
The PowerPoint?
So, yes, on the PowerPoint here, I've highlighted the block within the historic district
Okay, thank
in
you.
red. And then the historic district, I just wanted to give you the picture of, at least for these maps, the area that is the historic district is in green. Another packet? Oh, I'm sorry, so page 7 in the packet, if you're looking at your, the packet that was distributed.
Thank you.
Yes. So the existing heights in this northern portion of the historic district are 300 feet, bonusable to 425 feet. And that's the full 4-block area there to the north, in that northern part of the historic district. The recommended draft proposed to reduce heights in this 4-block area to 125 feet. We felt that in this area, it would better align, that height reduction would better align with future development, development expectations, and the overall character of the historic district.
So I'm going to second the mayor's amendment, and I got a briefing from BPS, Joe and his team, and what persuaded me was looking at the context in terms of surrounding buildings. And Mr. Zender, my recollection is either to the west or the northwest, there's a building that's about 160 feet, or
That's
maybe I got
right.
it reversed, but anyway, that's how you landed at 160.
Correct.
And because there's an apartment building across the way, and you felt that it was consistent. And so that's what persuaded me.
Yeah, we're trying to protect the character of the district, but also be fair and also look for precedent within the district. So that's how we arrived at that.
So if I might give an alternative opinion, because I was going to support the initial amendment. I've heard from the Landmarks Commission, they sent us a briefing that even the increase from 125 to 160 is about 3 more stories, would put a lot more pressure on development and demolition. Currently, the tallest building in this small historic district is 75 feet, which is Prosper Portland's building. So 160 feet would be a huge difference and not likely to get through Historic Landmarks Commission. We've got a problem in that when we don't set realistic expectations, we put a lot of pressure on our commissions to then preserve the district with something that fundamentally can't be passed by historic review.
Commissioner, here's another thing that I found compelling. It currently is allowed up to 350 feet with bonus height option to 425. And I think that when we're talking about substantially reducing the value of an existing piece of property from a legacy property owner in an area that's frankly been neglected for a long time by the city, I want to be careful about how much value we're taking away when we change the height. So since it's currently eligible to 425, I thought 160, which is consistent with the building that's adjacent, was a worthy compromise. It is a 2/3 reduction of what is currently allowed, and if I were a property owner, I'd be somewhat surprised to learn that the value of my property has been substantially reduced by a reduction like that.
I would just say that having a property in a historic district raises the value of the property, in particular if it's not being overshadowed by another out of incongruent building. But so we could move forward with the amendment as proposed by the Mayor and Commissioner Fish, and I'll just signal that I will be advocating for an alternative proposal and we'll be looking for public input on it.
Yeah, that's good. So B2 is also on the table along with B1. And I just want to point out, Commissioner Fish is right that the Pacific Tower immediately adjacent is 160 feet. And that's also consistent with the East Portland Grand Avenue Historic District, which is the same height. So,
but they're not in the district, with all due respect.
That's correct. That is correct. But in terms of the Landmarks Commission approval, I don't anticipate that being a problem. I'm not saying it couldn't be, but I don't anticipate that.
So I'd like to put this into the record, and if you could please have it for next time, it just show where the historic districts are, including this is in the historic district, but now going to be more similar to the other adjacent properties not in the district. Sorry.
Yeah, that'd be great. Item B3.
So this next item is adjacent to the historic district, but it is right outside the district. And through testimony we received, we had a proposal to restore the current height to 350 with an option to bonus to 425. And I've highlighted, the proposal came in for, on the left-hand side there, the block that's highlighted in red. The staff recommendation through the recommended draft, which is was to lower heights in this area to a base height of 250 with the ability to get to 325. So this is a similar, the recommended draft here and the proposal we had is very similar to what I described for the area just south of this, where the Moseland Theater is. Again, it was basically in an effort to right-size heights, and looking at what the pattern of development is that we see in the area.
And again, adjacent to the transit mall.
And again, yes, correct. So as we looked at this more closely, it is adjacent to the transit mall, and there is potential for additional development. What we would suggest, and the mayor's amendment being put forward, is to restore the base height to 350 with the option to bonus to 425 for the 4 blocks in this area, not just the 1 block highlighted in red on your screen, but that floor block area to be consistent with the pattern of development that we're seeing in that area.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Commissioner Saltzman seconds B3. Any further conversation on B3?
Could I just make a process suggestion? I would really like us to not rush to be the first person to second, because that kind of shuts down the discussion. So if we could possibly have discussion, if any, before seeking a second. Otherwise, I'm going to be very quick to jump in, and I don't really want to do that.
Sounds good. B4.
So this next item, and actually the next 3 slides that I have here, focus on 3 existing buildings, Big Pink, Pac West, and Wells Fargo. This first building, I'll get to the slide in a moment, but I want to describe for you for these 3 buildings. Today, these buildings have non-conforming status because they are taller and have higher FARs than exist in the central city today, but they were approved and met zoning regulations in place at the time. So what that means is they're non-conforming, they can rebuild if they were destroyed in a fire. Today, they can rebuild to the same height and same FAR. Our code allows that today. However, we've heard some concerns from the building owners that they've expressed concerns related to insuring and financing the buildings when they have non-conforming status. So we would recommend, and the mayor's amendment to put forward here is to provide these buildings with the heights and the FARs that they have today as constructed. So I wanted to just then go through each of these slides to tell you what that would be. So for Big Pink, the existing height of that building today, and Big Pink is the FAR is fine and consistent with what's on our FAR map at 15:1, but their current height is 545 feet. So we would, through the mayor's amendment, make that request that the height would be set at 545. So that's Big Pink. I think, let me just go through all 3 of them quickly here to show you. For Pac West and Wells Fargo, the amendment would be for Wells Fargo, it's a building at 555 feet. So the request amendment would be to put that at 555. Pac West is 430 feet. And in fact, our height maps were already reflecting that this particular area could bonus to 460. So we're just recommending maintaining that. So they would have their height at 430, but there would be the ability to get to 460 in the future.
So that's an amendment.
That's correct. And then for Pac West and Wells Fargo, they both are built at a higher FAR, a higher massing than what's on the map today. So for Wells Fargo, that would be changing their floor area ratio to 18:1 and changing Pac West's floor area ratio to 15:1.
Is there a unintended consequence of this? I'm reading the staff comments about essentially giving them conforming status, which they claim at least has some benefits in terms of getting insurance and other things. But what is there a potential unintended consequence of doing this? Are we, I mean, it's not, I can't imagine that, this isn't New York City where they tear down buildings like Big Pink to put up other luxury buildings, but is there a public interest in not allowing them to be conforming? In this instance, are we giving something up that at some point down the road we could regret?
Well, I think part of our recommendation is that we judge that there was, the risk was not worth holding on to the nonconforming status. We think for these buildings, for the scale of investment that they are, if it's a reasonable thing to have height and FAR match their current envelopes. If they were to be redeveloped, and the market would support that scale of development on these sites with tearing down a building of that scale in Portland, we would be in a different economic situation than we are right now for sure. And the building would still be an anomaly, but it would be replacing something that's sort of been at that scale and is for a long time. We didn't think, for urban design purposes or the likelihood of impact, that it was a risk.
I'll second the mayor's amendment.
Very good. Any further discussion on that? B4 is on the table. B5?
So this is on River Place. I'm gonna turn this over to Joe to briefly go through with you.
Okay, so I have a brief set of slides here to talk about the River Place height proposed height changes. This is a mid-rise development down on the waterfront, and the property owners worked with the Planning and Sustainability Commission to request a height increase that the Planning and Sustainability Commission approved to take it to, I believe it's a maximum of 200 feet. And also at the Planning and Sustainability Commission, we increased the floor area ratio of the site from 4-to-1 to 5-to-1. And that move was primarily to better ensure that we were likely to get the maximum use of the inclusionary housing program because of the benefits that come with being a 5-to-1 site. The owners of the site are now requesting additional height up to 400 feet on part of the site.
325.
And 325. And part of the reasoning is, the argument is that for the rest of South Waterfront, the height approach to height and the maximum heights should apply to this portion of the northern section of what today we'd call South Waterfront. In the past, South Waterfront didn't exist then. It was an industrial area. So there is precedent for increasing the height and bringing it into conformance and treating it for both development purposes and urban design purposes the same way we're treating the rest of the South Waterfront, and that would be a height of 325 feet.
I thought on that slide you just showed, South Waterfront was at 250.
Bonusable,
Bonusable to 350? Is that what you said?
325.
325.
325.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the maximum heights here I'm talking about are bonusable heights, include bonus.
And so just looking at that slide, I oppose this amendment because you see that the property on the west behind the proposed increase is at 200 feet. We have a comprehensive plan policy that says there's a step down to the river. So increasing the height in the middle of this development would go up rather than down to the river.
Well, where we are in the proposal is we're continuing our evaluation of this proposal from the applicant, and part of what we're doing is taking a look at this with the topography in mind as well, Commissioner, because there's from NATO down to this site, there's a significant drop on the bluff, and I believe the 200 feet is on the side of the bluff up to NATO. So you need to look at the topography. So what we're proposing is to continue this, to bring it back for more discussion. But the approach, I wanted to share with you the approach that we are working on, which is whatever the height increases that we consider for the site, the one that came out of the PSC or something more, that we're going to require a central city master plan provision to apply to the site. And we talked about this probably most recently in terms of the post office site in the Central City Broadway corridor. And what that says is to redevelop a piece of land, it's shown on the map, you have to go through a process that involves city staff and the Design Commission and a public hearing that considers a full sort of range of criteria and things that you need to show that you figured out so that we can see the development of the whole site. If you can remember the discussion around the post office site, there you get to, it's a site that's a big single piece of land now, which in many ways is the same way as this site. And we want to talk about where the streets are going to be and how you're going to use height and how you move around your floor area and what other amenities you're going to provide and do that in more detail as the design develops. So we would apply that approach to this site. And then the other things that we're continuing to work on and we'll bring back that I think can hopefully help address the question you're raising, Commissioner, is we're looking at shadow studies for whatever height proposal, for the proposal that's being requested, as well as some alternatives, the impact of different heights on view corridors, and we'll bring all that information back to share.
With all due respect, it's not like the post office site. There is already a lot of development there. We're already constrained in terms of parking and other infrastructure needs. We've had umpteen changes to the road configuration in that whole area. So asking planning staff to go through this entire exercise seems like a big burden for a single property owner.
Well, Commissioner, I think what persuaded us and I think the Planning and Sustainability Commission in the first place was what's allowed there today under our allowances, height and FAR, is a lot more that's built there. This was their first foray into, or one of our first, into waterfront development in the 80s and 90s. And bringing more development there and new investment there, we think is going to be very valuable for this part of the waterfront to both activate it more and to tie it into South Waterfront. There are ways to do this reinvestment, and it's a significant reinvestment that could be quite beneficial and a quite beneficial addition to the waterfront. How you design it is critical to accomplishing that. And so we've also, the approach that we're trying to do now is take a look at the heights with the same kind of methods that we're using now for the view corridors and other things. When we did this in the past in the 80s, our approach to this was different in that regard. Now we think, let's look at the site in the real situation, look at the bluff, and come back and show you that information to be able to consider additional heights. At the Planning and Sustainability Commission level, they were willing to step it up a notch. We want to do some additional analysis to see if there's still a case for doing that, and there may or may not be.
Well, it's certainly more than a notch. Do you know, what's the ownership pattern in that area? Are they all rental units or are some of them condominiums?
Yeah, this is a single rental piece of property. That's why it's unique and valuable. The condominium property is River Place Phase 1, which is just across Montgomery. And so that is a condominium process, and so that has many owners.
Yeah, so when this is redeveloped, if it does, then all those renters will be out, won't they?
Those renters would be, but the number of units would be significantly increased, potentially, depending how big it is. And whatever is built in the next generation would be subject to our inclusionary housing policy. So we have the real possibility of getting a mix of affordable housing into the new development. So that, you know, the baseline sort of things that we get from redevelopment and reinvestment, especially in a situation like this, seemed like they offer a good deal of public value as well as real estate value.
Can I touch on another area of concern? So some earlier amendments, you noted that the properties were adjacent to a transit corridor. And that was, in your judgment, critical to allowing substantial height. The one thing we know about River Place right now is it's somewhat isolated. And when you come out of River Place, you're on a failed, you're essentially on a failed transportation, a part of our transportation system. And we know that because I-5 is backed up forever. And all the traffic that's trying to head north and then make a right turn on the bridge is hopelessly stymied at rush hour. And it really, and I know that there's now light rail, but in terms of that particular parcel, it is sort of isolated, landlocked, and the road that you get on, well, I don't know whether it's Harbor, what's right out front?
I think it's Harbor.
Harbor, and then if you have an hour, you can get to the next intersection, and then hope and a prayer you can get on the bridge. I mean, so to what extent should we be anticipating the significant impacts on our on traffic circulation and on our system, particularly in light of the fact that that's a huge choke point because it's where I-5 terminates?
So these are really, both of these points work well together. Today, without any change at all, the site has 4-to-1 FAR. That's bonusable. So the only, and that determines the number of square feet that could be built on the piece of land. The only addition to that we are proposing is to increase it to 5-to-1, and mostly that's so that we have a better shot at getting more of the affordable housing. And 5-to-1, an additional 1-to-1 floor area ratio on that site's about 370,000 square feet of development. Okay. Second thing, you're absolutely right that the portals, the northern and southern way in and out of South Waterfront, are documented to be constrained. The amount of additional but at the end, we have projects in the transportation system plan that are anticipating that the district's going to continue to build out, and that we have some ideas that are regularly updated, honestly, in terms of projects, about how to deal with those choke points. We haven't budgeted for them. I mean, they are not funded yet, but they're in the TSP. So we know that at some point, the level of development and the level of traffic trips a point, and we need to proceed with those projects. And through the design review, or through the development review process, a certain amount of that improvement will be linked to the development that pushes us over that edge, or that helps us, trigger the need for that project at that time. So that's why we want to add this site to the required master plan area, because that creates a point where not just Bureau of Transportation planning, but their development review folks can get in and look at the detailed sort of what's really, based on what's really being proposed, not just the square feet of development, but how much parking they're providing. Like all of these things that would affect both trip generation and the localized traffic impact get assessed, have to be mitigated, get solved, and could affect the economics of the project. So this idea that's been floating around for this super block kind of development there may or may not happen when the economics are really examined and all the costs of what it's going to take to do that come into play. All we're doing in this move is opening the possibility to do that and to design it in a way that is taller than is allowed today and marginally allows more floor area.
How does that all relate to the concept of step down to the river?
So step down to the river, what we'd like to bring back to you is show you what we can accomplish here vis-a-vis step down to the river by taking in consideration the bluff and the tall even all the approaches, even what the Planning and Sustainability Commission has recommended for this, pushes taller buildings to the back of the site, Commissioner, towards the west, up against the hillside, and then tapers it down to the waterfront with, I believe, at the parts of the block closest to the waterfront are like 125. So this is 4 blocks. This is not just, it's one site, but it's 4 city blocks. And we're tapering those heights across that. We're proposing to do that. We're considering doing that.
So why are we assuming that there would be an inclusionary housing play here? Does the zoning require that, or is the applicant saying that is the intent rather than, because right now it's a mix of well, let's face it, there's a River Place Athletic Club, which is not housing. There's retail. They're essentially proposing to take the River Place Athletic Club site and redevelop it. Why do we assume that inclusionary housing would apply to any development there?
Well, there's no guarantee. But what makes it likely is inclusionary housing is triggered by a building of 20 units or more. So at the scale of development we're talking about here, and it's several buildings, it seems the economics of it are going to include residential and include buildings that are more than 20 units. So what's being talked about is no more than the current program would require. And that's only triggered really if you build residential of a certain scale or you need to get bonus floor area. So part of what happens when you see a proposal like this, it can be very exciting to see the potential of something like this. But at the zoning level, we're just opening the opportunity for someone to come in and try. And we've set the thresholds at a point where we don't want you to try beyond this because our judgment is on the public benefit. It either has negative consequences that we want to avoid, or the public benefit's not compelling enough. On the height and the arrangement of the height, we want to bring that back to you to talk about that. On the amount of floor area, we think it's a reasonable move to go from 4-to-1 to 5-to-1, especially in the context that we have inclusionary housing now. We think it's really opportune that we've created this Central City Master Plan tool. We've been needing this for a long time, honestly. And applying it to this site, no matter what we do with heights, even if we just left it the way it is now, is something that we would want to do because we'll get a better project out of it and it gives it more flexibility.
So is there a second for this?
So my understanding is you're going to come back on the 6th with some of that further analysis. I can either take a second now and we can offer amendments on the 6th, or we can just move this to the 6th, whatever.
I'll
the
second it.
council- So we have a second, and we'll have a further presentation and discussion then on this on the 6th, taking into account the questions asked by Commissioners Fritz and Fish. And I'd certainly like to see.
And Saltzman?
Can I?
I'm
can I
sorry.
just-
And Mayor, can I
Dan
just,
Saltzman.
can I just add that I've seen, so I have not had a briefing on this directly. My staff person has. But I've seen some diagrams. And, you know, I think the applicant has been very smart in showing what a world-class Japanese architect of the moment, who also just did the Japanese garden, might do with a beautiful tower. But one of the things I'm interested, Joe, in knowing more is what are the range of things that could they do as of right at that site? Because as we know, as you go from that site south, you know, there's some office buildings. There's a long-term, there's a kind of a hotel that has a long-term occupancy. There's a mix of, there's soon to be a grocery store. I'd just be interested in what are the various options they could do at the site, and does that include office towers?
Well,
And office towers is not so good for us in terms of inclusionary housing.
okay, we'll bring that back.
And can I just clarify for the record that this is a motion and a second more for the purposes of giving staff direction? There's not actually an amendment on the table yet. Staff just getting direction. Okay.
Right, today is
exactly
just
correct.
direction, and we'll bring it back.
Yeah, good. And colleagues, I'm sorry, I have to take a call, so I'm going to turn this over to our trusted council president for
no, in
item
trouble.
B6.
Just as her amendment is coming up. Well done, well
Yeah,
done.
nicely done. I think this next one's yours, actually, Commissioner Fish.
I think, Fish, you're right.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yes. So the next item is related to an area right on the edge of the central city in the central east side along Southeast 12th Avenue. And through public testimony, we received a proposal to cap the height at 50 feet. And this would be inclusive of bonus. So 50 feet would be as high as you could go. So the picture I'm showing you here is actually what exists today. So the base height along this area is 50 feet. And the hatch lines there allow a project to get to 125 through bonus. So that's what's in the existing code today, and through Central City 2035, we've not proposed to change that. So this is it's a no-change area from what exists today and what's in Central City 2035. We would recommend maintaining this base height of 50 and with the ability to go to 125 through bonuses. So we would not recommend, or we're not proposing an amendment on this item, but it was something that we understand the commission was interested in learning more about and discussing.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm interested in learning more, but I shouldn't be listing, I don't know why there's a Y next to my name on this one. I think this is one that we were interested in learning more about, but I don't have a strong opinion yet.
Aren't we changing the bonuses so it's only bonuses for affordable housing? Or the main bonuses for affordable housing?
That's right. That's correct. So in this area with a base height of 50, if they wanted to go above 50, it's bonus height, and they would have the affordable housing build it on site or pay into the fund. There's also the option for historic preservation, but your first bonus is affordable housing.
So, Commissioner Fish, I guess I'm not quite following. Are you interested in proposing this, having heard a little more, or do you want to hear more?
No, I never proposed it.
Okay. So I need a mover as well as a second if anybody's interested in. Seeing none, let's go to the next one. Thank you.
So the next item is related to height along the park blocks. And through testimony, we received several letters that requested lowering heights along the park blocks, both sides. And the testimony was anywhere from lower the heights to 75 feet. Some requests were 100 feet, applying to both sides of the park blocks. And in addition, we had some requests to consider requiring what we call step backs in the building. So maybe you'd have a podium and then the upper floors step back after 6 stories. And there was an interest in also removing any eligibility for bonus height along the park blocks. So that's just laying out for you everything we heard through testimony. So this photo here shows you in green the full extent of the park blocks, and you'll see on both sides of the park blocks through Central City 2035, we're proposing the requirement of a shadow study on both sides. So what that means is that the shadow study, any increase in height or using bonus height on either side of the park blocks, the applicant would have to provide us with a shadow study. And the reason for that is to see what kind of shadow would be on the park at different dates and different times of the day. And the code would require that if too much shadow is on the park, then the applicant needs to work with the design team and design commission to figure out how you would do things like step back your building, maybe provide a setback, so we don't have as much shade on the building. The whole purpose of that shadow study is to make sure we provide light and air to the park blocks. So staff wouldn't recommend amending the heights because we feel that the shadow study requirement will help get us there to meet that purpose of making sure that there is sunlight and air along the park blocks.
Commissioner Day, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well at all and having a little hard time tracking all of this information, but I had raised an issue with this. First of all, what is the current height restriction? I'm sorry if you've already said that.
So the heights vary along the park
They do,
blocks today.
okay.
That's right. So, so for example, down in the area around PSU, we have base heights of 100 feet. And as you head north through Bonus, you may be able to get to 175. Heading further north towards Burnside, again, base heights could be at 250 with a chance to get to 460. North of Burnside, it really fluctuates. Again, a base height of 100 with the ability to get to 250. But anytime you're going to propose a project that's going to go above that base height, the shadow study will kick in.
Okay, so we're not giving additional height, we're just saying we don't think we need to restrict it because we have this shadow study requirement in place.
That's staff's recommendation, that through the shadow study, that study will make sure that sufficient setbacks of the building and step backs in the building will occur to make sure that the shadows on the park are limited at certain times of day and days of the year.
And I raise this just because the park blocks are really kind of a unique treasure in our city, and they already get quite a bit of shade from existing buildings and canopy, and I was just concerned that we were going to allow more. So thanks for the explanation, and I don't feel like I need to pursue this unless someone else wants to jump on in. Thanks.
All right, very good. Thank you, Commissioner Udaley. B8, and it's my understanding B8 has already been moved and seconded, so this is really just discussion, is that correct?
Yes, that's
Okay,
right. So
very
we
good.
have this is the existing amendment for the Morrison Bridgehead, and It's already on the list, as the mayor has said. And the amendment, so I'll just explain here on the left-hand side, what we have is what exists today, which is at the bridgehead, the heights are 75 feet, and Commissioner Fritz's amendment is to maintain those existing conditions with that height. The proposal, which is on the map to your right, is that the base height doesn't change. It stays at 75 feet with the potential for bonus height to 250. So that is both the recommended draft and then Commissioner Fritz's amendment. I would just want to turn it over to you then, if you'd like to have any further discussion related to that.
Well, thank you. As it shows from the map here, it again would not have a step down to the river because the parcels behind are already developed at 235. So that would definitely block out their views. Again, when you look at the map of the historic districts, there's the Yam Hill on one side, there's the Skidmore on the other side. So having a huge building at the end of the bridgehead doesn't seem to me to be appropriate. It's going to be blocking views from the east side to the west side, and it's also going to be impeding traffic, which the Morrison is one of the main routes that Central East Side Industrial Area gets its freight to I-5 going south. So I've got multiple other responses, but that's just basically it, that I think of all the properties with potential conflicts of interest, that's the one that's most troubling.
So could I hear the staff rationale, and Commissioner Fritz has done a very good job of explaining her rationale, and she and I have had conversations about this. Taking into account what the current policy has been with regard to stepping down to the river and juxtaposing that against some of the conversations we've had about the potential for these sites to be difficult to develop and or the opportunity for signature developments here as a gateway entry to the city. Tell me how with the height proposal in place, the bonusable up to 250, how could you reconcile or how could you guide the future of that site? I mean, it's nice to sit here and think we could get a marquee signature development opportunity there that's an amazing entryway to the city, but there's no real guarantee of that. So what gives you confidence that this is the right thing to do? Or alternatively, what information do you have to suggest that this is a particularly difficult site to develop under the current height restrictions?
So the site itself, although these maps are not showing it, of course, 2/3 of it are ramps off of the Morrison Bridge. So there's major transportation infrastructure that's impacting the site. We explored for a good while how to develop in and around those ramps. So one of the obstacles to overcome is the cost to sufficiently sort of rearrange and re-engineer those ramps to keep them in service or not. The policy guidance we have on that is that even on those ramps, it's the northern ramp is important for the Central East Side and the access to the freeway for our freight on the Central East Side, and we have that industrial sanctuary policy. So that one, in our balancing of policies, we all expect stays in service, or some version of it does. The one on the south side may be more adjustable. So it's got to be big enough to warrant that kind of investment and trouble. At the same time, we have the step down to the river policy. We also have had, since the 80s, a policy of animating the riverfront, of connecting the two sides of the river and bringing activity down to Waterfront Park and to the riverfront. Part of, as the commissioner said, we have two very important historic districts that are along this stretch of NATO too. So they are what they are. We're going to protect them, but they're always going to be a smaller scale because that's part of their character. So the opportunities to bring more square feet, more people, more residential units, more office users down to this edge and have sort of quick and animating access to Waterfront Park and the activities there and this part of our downtown, they're limited. They happen to align with our bridgeheads. And we have the two that we focused on in this plan are the Hawthorne Bridgehead and the Morrison Bridgehead. The Hawthorne Bridgehead is a bigger district, so I think it's a little easier to see. The Morrison Bridgehead is just these 3 blocks. I mean, it's relatively tight. So that's the principles. It's step down to the river, the parts that step down to the river that we tried to honor is that, even though it's a taller height, it grades up as you go back towards the Transit Mall in the heart of downtown. Part of step down to the river in the business district was even if you're 3 blocks off the river, you get views if you get tall enough, because each of those blocks, gets to be taller than the one closer to the waterfront. That kind of principle stays.
So how did you pick the 250 versus, say, a 235?
I think we looked at it in terms of our standard sort of central city building height modules, what the floor area, how much floor area we're also allowing on these blocks, and so what's reasonable to give them a chance to design. Part of what the extra height here allows you to do too is deal with the fact that your floor plates are going to have to potentially be non-standard to deal with the transportation infrastructure. And we looked at shadow analysis for how that would impact Waterfront Park. And much beyond 250, we thought was too impactful for too long.
If you came down to 235, do you believe that substantially impacts the economics to the degree that you won't get a development there? Is that your concern?
No, I believe that 235, 250, given this site, given our market, is probably not that significant a difference.
Okay, and then just one.
There's
sort
no
of
specific program that we have for at the site. Maybe at one time, Mayor, when we were earlier in the quadrant plans, there was sort of active discussion of development. We remember the public market was part of this.
Sure.
But this is just a site now. It doesn't have that.
So let me ask you just one last question, and then I'll stop here. So you mentioned there's the transportation infrastructure, the Morrison on-ramps, off-ramps, all of that. Is the burden on the developer to deal with those issues? Where does that burden lie? Is that with the city? Is it with the county? Is it with the developer? Is it with all three?
It's with all three. I believe if Peabody, if Mauricio Leclerc's here, I'd ask him to chime in if I'm going to get this wrong. There's a county ownership involved in here too, because these are bridge facilities, so somebody's going to have to pay to make these changes happen. And part of what we've always assumed is the project's going to carry that.
Isn't the assumption, though, that the developer will, why are you providing, I'm trying to figure out why you need the additional height to incentivize them if they're not the ones bearing the cost?
No, the assumption is that the project would bear that cost.
The project would bear that cost.
Yeah, it's just a county
Okay.
facility.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this has been moved and seconded. I don't know if people have other
I have
comments.
just a
Commissioner
question,
Fisher.
and I mean this question to be provocative. There's a big split of opinion about how we should develop these bridgeheads. It's reflected in some of the conversations on this council. Is the eastern end of the Burnside Bridge at the Burnside Bridgehead, is that a cautionary tale, or is that a model?
Well, it depends on how you look at the architecture.
Well, by the way,
What if you
I
can't look at it?
understand. if
Well
I-
answered, Joe.
If I think I read somewhere that it's sold recently, and it's the most valuable real estate, one of the most expensive buildings that's been turned over, so there's no accounting for certain things, but beyond the, but more generally.
Commissioner, I think I would be misrepresenting if I could guarantee world-class architecture based on the moves that we're talking about today. We are.
Architecture aside, the size and the scale of that building and its location.
You know, that's an odd, that's a different sort of circumstance because there's this industrial land between the waterfront and that sort of little quadrant there. And I'm not even really sure what the maximum heights are allowed there. I would argue that with different, to me, the having a tall building at that bridgehead is not a problem. And the architecture may not be warranting the sort of aspiration we have for these gateways to the central city. But having a tall building there is actually, in an urban design sense, makes sense.
Very good. So this will come back then as part of the hearing package on January 18th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very good. So the next set of issues relate to scenic views. And C1 is the view of the city skyline from the I-84 overpass. I think that's Commissioner Saltzman, so why don't we skip that one for the moment. Same with C2 and C3. Let's hold off. And I hear a door opening. What's that? Leaving. This is scintillating. Why would anybody be leaving? The C4, the view of Mount Hood from Salmon Springs.
All right, let me jump ahead. Mindy Brooks with Planning and Sustainability. And we'll jump ahead and then we can jump back once Saltzman is here.
Great.
Let me turn my page. So this one was already entered as an amendment and seconded. So we're just mostly bringing it back so there can be discussion. And I was just going to do a quick summary again of the issues surrounding this one. So today there are 5 locations where you can see Mount Hood from the riverfront along the west side. And the one that could be protected is the one from Salmon Springs. It's the right location if you're going to protect a view. It also has the least impact of the 5 on development, but it does have considerable impact anyway on the central east side. So it would require a reduction of today's heights, which are 100 to 200, bonusable to 175 to 275. It would need to come down along the MLK Grand Corridor to 50 to 55 feet with no bonus option. And the other complicating factor here is that this area is a streetcar local improvement district for the streetcar along MLK Grand. And there are 29 properties in the view corridor that were assessed as part of that. And that assessment did include many factors, including allowable height and FAR. And with the height reductions, the base FAR could not be utilized on those sites. And I'll just stop there and turn it over to you for discussion or questions.
Yeah, good. I mean, this has been a really, this is a difficult one for me. Of all the decisions in this package, it's probably been the hardest, and it's been somewhat entertaining to speak to other people who've also held 6 different positions on this particular one. I think it is important that we protect critical view corridors. This one is difficult, however, because there is definitely going to be an impact in terms of the long-term goals around development in the central east side. And this, of course, cuts a swath right in the middle of it. We had testimony 3-ish weeks ago from some folks who are serving on that advisory committee. They also wrestled with this, and ultimately they decided to go on the side of not protecting this particular view corridor, but they expressed the importance of making sure that we do protect other corridors. Similarly, the Planning and Sustainability Commission had also, I believe, had the opportunity to look at this, and they had gone back and forth and ultimately sided on the side of supporting the long-term goals for the central east side. So I just want to put out there that this one I think is very challenging. I don't want to tip my hand to Commissioner Saltzman's protections on view corridors, but I'll just say I'm inclined to support those. This one, if I had to take a vote today, I'm 51% opposed to protecting that view corridor. But we have until January 18th, so we'll see what happens. Commissioner Fritz?
So you want to keep it on the table?
It's already on the table. We already.
It's already
moved
been,
it and seconded.
yeah, moved and seconded.
And I'm sorry, I
But
stepped
the
out of the
person who
room for a
moved and
second.
seconded it, withdraw it?
No need for a second.
We're coming back to yours,
Oh, okay,
Commissioner.
okay.
Yeah.
No need
Oh,
for
we
a
voted
second.
no on all your stuff.
Okay.
Do you want to clarify?
I left the room, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think since it's been moved and seconded, it's on the table, and then if no one votes for it later, then it just goes away, or, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I wanted it on the table because I wanted to hear the public testimony and I wanted to hear the professional testimony. I'm glad we've had the conversation. It's been useful for me. So with that, we will move back to C1, which is the view of the city skyline from the I-84 overpass. Commissioner Saltzman's items, and we'll start with Mindy.
Yeah, I'll just jump back to that one here.
We just skipped around.
Okay. So,
Big fire going on, as you can tell.
this
Here.
one, this is a view of the city skyline from 12th Avenue overpass over I-84. And this view has been protected since 1991 with height restrictions. Through this process, staff proposed moving the viewpoint from 12th Avenue, which is circled in red, to a yet-to-be-constructed bicycle and pedestrian overpass between 7th and 8th, which is circled in blue. The new overpass is in the TSP, and we anticipate that the bicycle and pedestrian traffic will move from 12th to this new bridge, so we think it's the right location for a viewpoint. And there's an opportunity to design a viewpoint into that design of the bridge. We made assumptions about the alignment of the new bike ped bridge, and we chose to put the viewpoint in what would be the middle of that, not knowing where it might actually be designed. But we do use GIS to set coordinates for that point and an elevation for that point, so we're pretty confident in how it affects heights emanating from there to the skyline. So today's existing height limitation, and I've indicated where we received testimony from the property that we've received testimony from. Today, there is an 80-foot height limit over most of that site to protect the view from 12th. Moving that view to the bike ped bridge actually reduces impacts to the northern property, expands impacts a little bit to the southern property, but the property in question, the northern half of that property would go to 250 with an option to bonus to 325, while the southern portion drops to a 70-foot height limit. So, again, we picked a centered alignment. You could certainly pick another alignment on here. The question was, why would we do this when we don't know exactly where the alignment would be? And so you certainly could look at different alignments along that bridge. The other option would be to keep the viewpoint on 12th Avenue until the bridge is actually done and a viewpoint is put, and then move the viewpoint, which would mean retaining the 80-foot height limit over that property until the bridge is constructed. And I'll turn it over to Salzman.
Well, I think that is the intent of my amendment, isn't that correct? Keep it at 12th Avenue until we know where the alignment for the pedestrian bridge actually is, and then reestablish.
So we can do that.
Yeah.
Mhm. We can do that, or we can wait and then reestablish or reassess once we know where the point is and adjust heights at that time.
Yeah, that would be what I'm recommending.
And that's keeping the existing view corridor that's been there since 1991, is that right?
That's what we would be doing
So
there.
do we even need to
Number one.
have a discussion on that, or?
Get back up.
Yes, because we did propose to change it, so we would
see.
need to make an amendment to put it,
Okay.
go back to the existing height limits.
Then I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? I just want to say, I think that's entirely appropriate, and I'll obviously support that as well. C2.
Okay. This is a view of Mount Hood from Tillicum Crossing. Like the riverfront, there are 5 locations on bridges where you can see Mount Hood today, and all those, again, would be blocked by development in the future. This one from Tillicum, protecting it has the least impacts to development than all of the views from the bridges.
Oh, thanks a lot.
We heard from one property owner where this height, this view corridor crosses, and there would be a height limitation. We call this the Ivon Street property. Today, this whole site is an IH, heavy industrial use. It's being rezoned to an EX, so it has no height limitations because it's a heavy industrial site. The EX, then we would apply height limits to it. Within the view corridor, it would be 60 feet. Outside the view corridor, it would be 100 feet base with an option to bonus to 250. You also see on this map the river environmental overlay zone that would be applied to all sites along the riverfront, including this one. The area I circled in red, which is outside of the overlay zone in the view corridor, is about 0.9 acres. It's larger than a standard city block, so we feel there's a lot of space on this site to get to those taller heights and be able to protect that view corridor. So we recommend keeping the view corridor and height limits on the site. And I'll turn it over to
Commissioner Saltzman.
Commissioner
Well,
Saltzman for that one, yes.
I think you made a pretty persuasive case just now. I proposed this amendment because it was, I felt a piece of property that has some potential development. For what, I'm not quite sure, but it could be residential, it could be commercial. I think the owner has some interesting visions for that property, and that he felt limited by this proposal. So that's why I put forward the amendment. But I can't say that I'm in it 100%, I just,
Commissioner, we don't have an amendment specifically from
Okay.
you on this. Is it to not propose this view corridor? Is that your amendment?
I think that's what it would be, yeah.
So I'll chime in on this one. I actually was persuaded by the staff work that we should maintain this view corridor. And what ultimately persuaded me was the demonstration that these sites are still highly developable, even with the view corridor remaining intact.
And I can't say I disagree with that, having heard your presentation there.
Thank you.
So if there's no second, it stays as that.
Are you okay with that? Okay, very good. Next item, please, is C3, view of the Vista Bridge. This is
Okay.
also Commissioner Saltzman.
So today, there is an existing view from 18th Avenue and height limits associated with that of about 30 to 45 feet along the northern side of Jefferson Street. The recommendation coming out of Planning and Sustainability Commission was to go to 75 feet along the northern side of the street because Jefferson Street is a commercial corridor along a light rail stop. Going to 75 feet does impact the view from 18th Avenue, from 14th Avenue, I spoke wrong, from 14th Avenue there, it would have some intrusion into the view. This view from 14th is a view from a car or bicycle. You can't see the bridge from the sidewalk, and there isn't an opportunity to develop a viewpoint here. So Planning and Sustainability Commission also entered a new viewpoint in addition to the view from 14th, and that new viewpoint would be at Collins Circle, which is at 18th. And this is a public open space next to the light rail stop where a viewpoint could be developed, and the 75 feet does not impact that view. So that's what Planning and Sustainability recommended, and staff would continue to make that recommendation. And I'll turn that over to you for discussion.
I didn't actually offer that amendment.
I think it's the mayor.
There are
I raised
three
it.
commissioners who were interested in
discussing
discussing
it.
it. There weren't any amendments put on the table. And
Okay.
that's the
Okay.
mayor, Commissioner Fish, and Commissioner Udaly.
Could we get that photo back, by any chance? Or did something just,
Well, it's written in our script what their amendment is.
right, I need to see the image. I am confused by these images because don't they both depict what the bridge, the view would look like with possible development? Neither of
That's
them are
right.
current.
Both of these depict what it would look like with 75 feet allowed along the northern portion. The top view is from 14th Avenue, which is where you cross I-405. The bottom view is then down at 18th at Collins Circle.
And this is the same building in both?
So the building that you see, if you look at the top picture, the building that is encroaching then upon the view is then in the lower picture, the one that is immediately to the right.
Okay. I mean, I raised this, out of all the view corridors that were in play, I felt like this was the most unique one, because unlike the mountain, which you can see from a variety of vantage points throughout the city, you really only have one opportunity to see the bridge, and it's a beautiful bridge, and it's an iconic view. So, do we
Yes,
have
and-
any before photos to compare? I mean, I'm just finding this a little challenging to...
I don't think there's a before photo in this set of pictures. And we can certainly bring that back to you if you'd like to see one. I will point out that you can see the bridge from Southwest 14th, then because of the street and the topography, you can't see it again until about Collins Circle. So there's really these two places are the places from which you can protect this view.
So I'd like to join Commissioner Udaley's amendment and keep Vista Bridge current protection as a view corridor from I-405 to the bridge, lower the heights to 25 from 20th to the bridge and 50 feet from 405 to Southwest 20th, and then also remove the proposed Southwest, or SW, whatever that means, 72 as a view of the Vista Bridge.
Okay?
And I would like to see just a side-by-side comparison would be really helpful, because I'm just not clear on how significant that change is.
Okay.
So that's a motion and a second
Yep.
on C3. And I had one just additional question on this. So when you say the view from Collins Circle, is that from the sidewalk? Where is that view from?
Sure, so there's actually a circle in the middle of the road. It's like a roundabout there.
I'm familiar with
Yeah.
the circle. I'm just trying to picture where.
There's not actually a sidewalk there. I would call it kind of a goat path where people cross anyway. And so the pedestrian connectivity would need to be improved and a sidewalk would need to be constructed across there for it to actually be
Okay, so
a
you
viewpoint.
literally meant earlier then, and I wasn't sure, but since you literally meant you would have to construct a public space in order to really create this view.
You'd want to improve the space that's there, that's really being used kind of ad hoc as a way for people to cross the street.
Okay, and just so I'm clear, and I think I asked you this in a staff session, from the Vista Bridge itself, either of these configurations, obviously the status quo, or alternatively, even if we did this, you still do not block the view
Of
from-
Mount Hood from Vista Bridge?
Yes.
No, we've recommended lowering heights to protect that view.
Could I see, and I think you may already have drawn one up, it may have just been one of those things I imagine at 3 in the morning. As long as you're doing a before picture.
Yeah, you wanna see
could
that
you
picture
please
too?
Could you give me a rendering, nothing fancy, just like this is great?
Yep.
Could you please superimpose what the view from the Vista Bridge would be like under this configuration?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That'd be helpful for me.
And I believe, I will definitely bring those back, but I believe in the packet that we gave you from the briefing before the hearings, both of those are in that
I
packet.
think it was, yeah, I
so.
vaguely remember that,
Yeah.
so I'll.
But we can
I'll look
definitely
for
bring
that.
it back.
Okay, great, thank you.
And if I
appreciate it.
might amend what I just said, there's no harm in keeping SW72 as a view of the Vista
That's true.
Bridge. So would that be all right if we do that as well?
Sure.
I've actually got one near my home that I want to have a little circle in the middle so I can look out on Mount Hood.
It is a public open space that's not well utilized because of the way that it's configured, so.
We can make it more welcoming.
And I like goat path. That would could also be called a desire line, couldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Nice to
All
have
right.
options.
Good, so we've got C4, we've already taken care of, so we're now at C5, Japanese
Yeah, and
garden.
that's, again, quickly, this one was already an amendment that was proposed and seconded to extend the view corridor downslope a bit more so that the potential trees impacting this view could be addressed. And
I think we have this one by acclamation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Is there any further discussion on this item? So we'll see this one back on January 18th, so that moves us to transportation.
thank you.
And we're starting with the I-5 Rose Quarter.
Did we already do the Water Avenue realignment?
Did I miss one?
Yeah.
It's coming up.
Oh, yeah, it's coming
Okay.
up.
All right, good afternoon. Mauricio Leclerc, PBOT.
Art Pierce, also from PBOT.
So let's switch gears here. We have a new PowerPoint. So The amendment, the packet D, I believe, has a table of proposed TSP project amendments. So for discussion are Water Avenue and the Rose Quarter interchange projects related. I have a technical issue. What happens if we don't discuss the other ones? They are
As consent.
consent, right? So is that the understanding?
I believe, Sally, you want to clarify that? How are we handling the TSP ones, please?
That's the one. Wow.
All right, so we, staff has proposed some, well, we received a lot of testimony. On some cases, we have some technical amendments to the TSP lists. For example, reconcile the work that we're doing on emergency, with fire and police and emergency response, changing a few classifications here and there, but we consider them at this point minor amendments. Of course, you had the package before you, and if you need, we are happy to discuss any of them with you. For discussion and and with a motion, or at least are the Water Avenue and the Rose Quarter. For the first one, it's a request from OMSI, and there is no amendment. I don't think there's an amendment proposed, but so we'll go through a motion. In the second one, there is an amendment from Commissioner Salzman, so we'll get into it. So on Water Avenue, the request from OMSI to add a project that was left out. Basically, if you can read the map, this is what OMSI is today, and you see a big S, that's Water Avenue, and we've moved it to the east as part of the previous processes. Now, OMSI just finished a master plan, and which you can see at a high level, conceptual level on the right. And basically what they call for is to realign Water Avenue, what you see here in light orange. Basically the Water Avenue run parallel to the railroad tracks. That would allow Water Avenue to serve a more local function, to serve their internal campuses, kids coming in, local service stuff. This Water Avenue is a critical connection this side of the railroad because it's the only real big major street, so a lot of trucks and traffic goes through it. This will push it to the side and allow OMSI to have a more pedestrian-oriented campus. Also, the design, what they have in their master plan and what we would be recommending in the TSP, it's a wide street, but primarily with a lot of new facilities. You can see where the trees are, bike-separated facility running to the west of the railroad track, and then a large sidewalk on the other side that will serve the OMSI new sites. And in the middle, there will be local the circulation that that water carries today. So our staff recommendation is to add it to the TSP list as a Water Avenue realignment phase 2, and we'll bring back details later as to what the definition is.
And I'd be glad to propose that.
Okay?
Second.
Any seconds?
Very good. So we
Okay.
have a proposal and a second for D1. Thank you.
So secondly, as part of testimony, you heard a lot about this project. It's basically 3 TSP projects that make up the I-5 Broadway-Weiler interchange project, also referred to as the Rose Quarter interchange project. So we want to provide you a brief summary of the process. We have 2 years that we worked on this. Some of you were here and voted for it in the past, but for benefit of the conversation and the new council members, here's a history, as well as what the big ideas were, the elements of it, and the amendment. So basically, staff is saying no to remove these projects from the TSP, but the Commissioner Salzman has amendments to an action item that accompanies this TSP, and you will find that on volume 5A, page 114, action item 120, for those of you who memorized the Central City Plan.
That's not nice.
Oh, that.
Yeah, that one, yes. To provide the proper context, we had to go back to the 1960s and the radical transformation of the area. And that provides context to what we're trying to do and what the project actually, the heart of the project is. Basically, this area used to be Albina, the heart of the African-American community, a stable place. You can see here a picture, 1950, with a grid. It was also, before that, part of the city of Albina. But, major interventions in the 1960s, the building of I-5, Emmanuel Hospital, Memorial Coliseum radically changed the area and led a lot of displacement and really broke apart what used to be a community. You can see Memorial Coliseum and a sea of parking around it, that later became Rose Quarter. So a lot of change, and from a transportation perspective, large community impact. From a transportation perspective, it led the area divided in half. You can see there what the pattern is today, large super blocks, not a very pedestrian-friendly, human-scale place, and with a big barrier that runs with I-5 running through the middle of it. As part of it, so that set the framework for the Northeast Quadrant Plan. We did an inventory of historic resources, as you can see, compared to Elliott and Irvington, how much was lost. Yellow, orange, and red are historic properties built before 1960. So that provided context. We also learned about some key left sites that are remaining, like the left bank. There used to be the Dude Ranch and provided, it was a place during the jazz era in which great jazz players played. You can see Louis Armstrong at the bottom there. So that fed into the context of what we wanted to do. At the same time, the freeway was built, and that provides a regional, a very important regional function, actually state and national function as part of the interstate system. So it funnels traffic from I-5, from the north and south, US 30 from across the river, I-405, also from across the river, and I-84. So it's a major interchange. Usually in cases like this, when major interchanges come together, and interchange gets bigger to accommodate all the traffic. What happens here is the opposite. It narrows down, and as it goes under Broadway Wilder, everything narrows down to 2 lanes, and there are no shoulders provided. So since the very, soon after it was built, all the way in the following decades, it became, a problem. But at the same time, it provides regional mobility. It also provides access to Lower Albina, the Moda Center, Lloyd District, and much of North and Northeast Portland. So because it became a problem, it has a design problem throughout the decades. The region and ODOT tried to find a solution for it. The latest one was the Greeley-Banfield project proposed in 1996. But basically this, trying to address that issue that it's kind of a bottleneck. So that project significantly expanded the freeway with a new flyover, then it kind of goes to where Wheeler Avenue is today, and also provided, expanded the width of the freeway, the footprint of it. It distorted all the local connections, and it would have meant the loss of sidewalks and bicycle connections galore. So I'll come back to compare this project to the one that we replaced it with, the Northeast Quadrant. So with that context, they need to address a regional problem on the freeway, and they need to address local connections and placemaking. We engaged in 2010 with ODOT on the Northeast Quadrant plan led by the Bureau of Planning, and that led to the adopted plan in 2012 and the facility plan that is part of ODOT's adoption. It was adopted by the Oregon Transportation Commission, and subsequently this freeway project was adopted by the region and is now in the regional transportation plan. So we started with a committee of 30 members, broad representation in the local community as well as regional representation. And we went through 19 meetings with the community, 14 subcommittees, many public events, over 85 community meetings, and about 3,000 people directly participated in this. We developed over 70 options, and we set broad goals for the land use side and for the transportation side. On the land use side, we're expected to have, as part of this plan, that now is embedded in the Central City Plan, 8,000 new housing units and 9,000 new jobs. As we begin to analyze the area, we know that development has happened along the red and the blue line, along Lloyd. You can see development, but you don't see much in the area of the freeway. You haven't seen much, except it's very auto-dominated, and there's a lot of potential there that hasn't been materialized, hasn't been tapped. And we even called it, the hole in the donut. And that's the effect of the freeway that it has on development as well. So the plan, we worked together with ODOT and determined to have 2 major goals for addressing the freeway. Improve the safety and operations of the interchange itself. It has the highest freeway crash rates in the state. It's short weaving sections, and as part of the design of the freeway, and also it's a top freight bottleneck in the United States. But also at the same time, improve the interface with local streets, improve bicycle safety, mobility, increase pedestrian connectivity, and also enhance traffic and access into the Rose Quarter and so forth. So the primary barrier is the north-south connection, a barrier that I-5 creates. You see in orange where there are no crossings of I-5. So between Russell and Broadway, there are no crossings in between Wilder to the north and between Wilder, which is actually, can I use the mouse? From here to Multnomah, there's no crossing either. So particularly the freeway created a barrier east-west, and that's somewhat what this project addresses. Since the adoption of the plan, we discussed a lot about conflicts in this area known as the box, which is right here. This is where all the traffic comes together, a streetcar, people walking to east and west, going to the events and Rose Garden Arena. Everything comes together. It's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of well-documented bicycle collisions. And for example, as part of the Vision Zero Action Plan, Broadway is identified as a high crash corridor and is in fact the #1 bicycle high crash corridor in the city. So
Number one?
yeah, for bicycle. Yeah. So in terms of context, this is what you had before, and the old design and the new design. I'll provide a little bit more context, but you can see already that we're gaining connectivity here with Hancock and with the proposed Clackamas connection. We're keeping primarily the old grid over Broadway, Wilder, Williams, and Vancouver, and north in this case would be to your left. This is a bed, this is the old design that basically would have shifted the grid, Vancouver Williams, and turn them into what we call frontage roads, basically a large interchange. This is the old design to your left. And instead, what this project is providing more east-west connections, lit, covers over the freeway that lessen the noise and visual impact of the freeway, provide potentially some open space, and some new bicycle and pedestrian facilities. In terms of the freeway itself, the old design would have had a lot more lanes, and the width of it would have been a lot bigger, and actually flying ramps over First Avenue to the east and Wheeler to the west. And the new design adds one auxiliary lane in each direction, plus the rebuilding of the on and off ramps to accommodate that space. The new design is also less costly, and it has a smaller footprint. So in terms of land use and development, it was important to provide access to the Portland Public School master site, which is now in the plan, it's Central City Plan master plan site. We do that by realigning Flint. So Flint would be, which goes straight north-south and now goes diagonally, and opened up that area for potential redevelopment. Also, a key idea that developed at the time was the box around the box. We mentioned the box was very polluted, a lot of traffic, a lot of conflict. What if we were to provide a north and south connection that is more quiet space for pedestrian and cyclists to navigate, so you don't have to enter the box in the first place, and you can ride around with your kid and so forth and avoid the area altogether. So that's what you see when you see this design. This is basically a close-up of the interchange from a local perspective. So here you have Vancouver Williams, and all these will be replaced. But basically, by having to widen the freeway, you have to replace all the bridges. There's just not enough space to widen without doing that. So that allows us to replace all these bridges and build them up to standard. These are old bridges, so things will be seismically upgraded. And here we have one lit in the north with this new Hancock connection, maintaining the connectivity on Broadway, Wilder, Vancouver, Williams, and adding a ped bike-only bridge at Clackamas. There's also benefits in the local traffic. In a way, we're going to change pattern. Today, people coming from Broadway have to go through the box, go several extra blocks, and then go through the Rose Quarter, which is basically an on-ramp during much of the day to access. Now we're basically moving the on-ramp to a higher point on Wilder so that there will be much less traffic going through the Rose Quarter. So that assists in the redevelopment of the Rose Quarter itself. And here's a concept drawing of what it could be, with a lid in the north, a lid in the middle, and a Clackamas bridge that is likely to be curved because of design. So from our perspective, it's a good project for the region and for us. From a freeway perspective, it's been estimated that it may lead up to roughly 50% reduction in crashes based on simulation by adding the aux lane, less congestion as a result of those crashes, which is important for reliability purposes, for freight. Also, the shoulders themselves allow people, cars that are broken down to be moved, and also ambulances and, emergency vehicles to respond quickly. In terms of local circulation, we will have new facilities, new overpasses, seismically upgraded, better bicycle pedestrian facilities, wide sidewalks, separated facilities. We will have better connectivity that will assist development, and the lifts themselves will create place-making opportunities and also open space.
So could you tell us more about the lids?
Yeah.
And, I think it's a great vision. It's also my understanding that the funding isn't there in this package for that. So tell me more about the vision.
The project since then has been funded, by HB 2017, and our understanding is it funds the whole thing. It's funding the lids, it's funding the local improvements at this point.
So, 4 slides previous, you showed us, right there. So, which of those lids are actually funded in this project?
At this point, it's the northern lid, which is here, and the middle lid that replaces Vancouver, Williams,
So is it the
and
whole
Broadway
area
Weather.
3, 4, and 5 that are designated there as 3, 4, and 5?
Plus the bridge
Okay,
here.
so why are we leaving off the central one? Why not just close it?
That's a great question. The latest design has made the space smaller. So at this point, there are 2 reasons why is that it's not necessary to build the structure above. But also, there's at some point you connect lids and they become a tunnel. So there may be some technical issues in which there's new ventilation in other systems, different depth and clearances that need to be applied. So again, this is a conceptual design. All that is just starting the process, and we may learn a lot about the lids, and we really want to maximize the opportunities that we can.
Well, I
can
just hope that, and I understand that, and I wanted to just get this out there on the record. I hope conceptually, we think bigger about this, because this is an area of the city where you could redefine what this portion of the city is through basically capping the freeway there, which is technologically completely feasible. And you see in other cities, they put pedestrian ways, public spaces, fountains, parks, trees. I mean, there's really virtually an unlimited amount of things you could do in a part of our city that's really been neglected.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So I hope we keep pushing
Yes.
up the food chain for
So far,
for
the
some of
cost
those
does not cover that
visionary
gap, though. But that's certainly the
Well,
expected.
it never covers the interesting stuff, does it?
And I think-
And that's
yeah.
why we have to be persistent.
Correct.
Mauricio, can I jump in for a sec?
Yes.
Can I just ask for some additional information?
Yes.
Between now and just put on the record? So I want to make sure that as we're making these decisions, we have an agreed-upon baseline of facts. And so you referenced bike safety and some data on bike crashes, accidents. As someone who is more of a pedestrian these days, I'm actually alarmed at what the behavior I see on our streets. But I'd like to see that data if I could.
Okay.
On the question of the accidents and the risks currently of the I-5 interchange. I'm talking about when you're going south on I-5, merging to get onto the Banfield while traffic's coming in, merging to get in your lane, which has got to be one of the most dangerous merges in both ways. I'd like to have a better sense of the existing data on crashes and accidents and property damage. Because it seems to me we should be able to agree on a baseline set of data there, hopefully. When you said earlier that some of the connectivity was connected to PPS, I take it you meant PPS in the sense that it's the Blanchard building, not necessarily PPS as a long-term tenant of that site, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So whatever is contemplated there, it creates the connectivity. The question of having a shoulder for a car to get off, or a disabled car, or an emergency vehicle, that seems like a pretty basic thing. Could I just have the citation to whatever the law is that encourage us to have shoulders? It seems a no-brainer, but I'd just like to make sure I understand what the current state of the law is in encouraging shoulders and why that's important. Freight mobility, we have lots of different policies about freight mobility and about, so one of our goals is we want a truck that's going through the city to be able to get through I-5 in a reasonable amount of time. Do we have some good data right now on how congestion is impacting freight mobility? And that's probably part of the quadrant plan, but if you could just point me in the right direction, because I'd like to look at that. Sometimes when we talk about congestion, sometimes the debate is framed in terms of some congestion's okay because if you fix the congestion, it'll get worse. That seems to be the argument that we hear from some people. And the problem is they both have climate impacts. Current congestion is not so good, and we've acknowledged that from the Rose Quarter to Vancouver, that part of I-5 runs through neighborhoods that historically have had their unfair share of bad air and environmental pollution. So everyone's going to have a different view about congestion and its impacts. Any thoughts you have, though, about congestion under the status quo versus the potential growth in congestion?
Yeah, okay.
And then finally, there's a lot of conversations going on now about reclaiming some history at this site. I won't go into all the details here, but there's a lot of well-intentioned people who have said that there's a way to honor the legacy of Albina and the missed opportunities under the Albina plan by reimagining the Rose Quarter. And what I've seen of that depends very much on changing the connectivity of that area, both to the east and to the south. And in a sense, undoing some of the damage by recreating the street grid and then opening up opportunities for more human scale development and then thinking about how we reverse some history that has not quite worked out very well, and in some instances we're not very proud of. And it will be helpful for me to better understand as we go through this how much of what we're talking about here facilitates the kinds of creative planning that people are doing at the grassroots level to reimagine that district, particularly around connectivity. So those are things I'd like to know more about, and I'd like to get as much as possible an understanding of agreed upon facts. We can have debates about trade-offs, and we can have debates about priorities, and in a perfect world, we might spend the money differently somewhere else. Those are legitimate questions. Sure. But I want to make sure that I have the baseline understanding to go through. And I have to say that seeing some of these visions for a reimagined Rose Quarter is very exciting. And to the extent our current circulation there works against those visions, that's very important to me.
Yeah.
And that happens to be an equity play as much as it is a transportation play. So those are just, I'm sorry to load you up, but those are
Okay,
things that would be
I think we can
helpful for
address
me,
some of them as part of the conversation.
even if you just point me in the right direction.
Yeah, we'll get you some facts. I think I have a little picture for the bike crashes here. Of course, I didn't bring. But yes, we agree that we have, this project would help development, not just for the area, but for the central city, and actually allows us to have this multimodal mixed-use area designation that actually it lifts the standards, the congestion mobility standards that we need to apply as part of redevelopment. So in a way, it makes redevelopment easier. So
It might be worth going in more detail on the specifics of the MMA. I think this is an important piece of the conversation.
okay, so basically, we have cases actually in the Central East Side, for example, where ODOT said, put limits on development because of the impacts on the freeway. So the Oregon planning system has a way, an internal conflict. One is develop downtowns, develop mixed-use areas. At the same time, say don't add too much new cars to the freeways. Well, what happens is that which one wins? Basically, by developing downtowns, you're actually leading to less traffic overall, right? No more connectivity, more pedestrian traffic. So in a way, this The state recognized that and created this MMA designation that basically says if you meet the certain requirements, land use, connectivity, density, which certainly the central city meets, then you don't have to respond to all that saying you're adding, with this new zone change, you're adding too much traffic onto your, the freeway. So in a way, by having an MMA, it's easier to densify, to apply new land use changes to the central city. However, safety standards do remain. So when actually a development does have an impact on the freeway system, then ODOT cannot say, we need to respond to that. That is the case today. This is, the worst safety spot in the state. So therefore, this project allows us to pursue the MMA designation, and ODOT has given us concurrence that they would, they agree that this is an MMA, so long as we have this project in the books, because this is how we address safety in the northeast quadrant area.
So the Rose Quarter project itself is part of us getting concurrence from ODOT to have an MMA to further the development that we want to see on adjacent parcels.
Yeah, and this is, into the future. Any new land use amendment for the central city, has one less hurdle to do, technically speaking. So to summarize, and then we can get back into what some of the Commissioner Fish's questions. This is, from our perspective, is an innovative design. It took a lot of compromise in that, but I think we ended up with a good solution. For us, it could have a complete rebuild and seismic upgraded facilities, critical new improved pedestrian facilities, lights over the freeway, enhancing accessibility and livability, and redevelopment. So we think that this is potentially a good move. We very much agree with the mayor and the Commissioner Salzman and Commissioner Fish. So and actually the Planning Commission deliberated on this as they put together their recommended draft for you. And they added in this action item some conditions on these TSP projects. So I'll read them, I'll paraphrase them because they're actually long. But basically, one, we want the whole element, all of the elements of the project, not just the freeway, but actually, as part of the city's participation, we want the lids, we want the pedestrian crossings, we want the local connections and improved connections and bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Secondly, we should have city council-sponsored equity strategy that begins to put together, the opportunity that this provides into the larger framework that we're talking about. So in this case, it says, condition on the development of a city council-supported equity strategy addressing issues related to the Broadway, to this project, including historically African-American community impacts, low-income housing, and minority women, emerging small business community benefits. Thirdly, that the funding for this project be done in a transparent way and make sure that it doesn't steal funds from East Portland. And fourth, that ODOT and PBOT evaluate congestion pricing as part of in the future. So, to go back to a little bit more detail as to what Commissioner Fish was saying, there's a lot that can be, and actually the mayor as well, there's a lot that's going on now. The opportunity is big. So in a way, we've been meeting with some bureaus, including Prosperity Portland, OMF, PPS, and Housing, and beginning to think about how does this project can influence some of the activities that we have. So this is a map provided by Prosperity Portland. We have the urban renewal, interstate urban renewal area, and there's some initiatives already there with some committees going on, addressing community development, the North-Northeast Community Development Initiative, the North-Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy that Housing is leading. We have activities and potential changes in the Rose Quarter area itself. And there's a big vision that is being developed there by the private sector. And we have, of course, development, existing and new development happening in the Oregon Convention Center area, including the Convention Center Hotel, the second phase of the Hassel is Oregon Square, and the Lloyd Cinemas parking lot. So there's a lot, the city's investing a lot, but at the same time, here comes a new project, and we want to be able to better tap into that. So working with Commissioner Salzman, he has proposed an amendment, actually, to add to that action item, edits to number 4 and a new number 5. To number 4, basically, instead of saying encouraged to evaluate congestion pricing, it will read ODOT in partnership with PBOT will implement congestion pricing and TDM options to facilitate for climate impacts as soon as feasible and prior to the opening of this project. And secondly, it's a directive to city bureaus to work cooperatively to make sure that all the elements of the project are implemented, and to integrate the project with other city-led and community efforts that advance city goals in the Rose Quarter, Lloyd District, Lower Alpina, and immediate Northeast Portland. Special attention will be given to opportunities to include more affordable housing, promote economic development and redevelopment, implement multimodal transportation improvements, including the Green Loop, which actually uses Clackamas Street, and the new bridge, and provide additional open space opportunities under an overall equity strategy for city-led investments in the area. This is in your packet. ODOT will be one of the lead implementers of this action item. So that is a amendment that is being proposed by the commissioner. So I'll stop there.
I have a couple questions. First of all, thank you for that. This has been a challenging project to wrap my brain around, and as you may know, we've heard a lot of criticism from community members, unfortunately, after this was passed at the state level, so it's somewhat reassuring to hear that this is a conversation that's been going on for 2 years and is involved in a significant amount of community outreach and public involvement. So my main concern is I am hearing some critiques of the bicycle infrastructure part of the plan, and I'm wondering if, assuming we agree kind of on the overall mission, if there's still going to be opportunities to make adjustments to that piece of it.
And yes, we'll have several years more of design. So at this,
boy.
yeah, at this point, we don't have a design, but certainly we have the lids and the rebuilding of all the infrastructure allows us to have, good, much better than we have now, hopefully state-of-the-art facilities.
Yeah.
So we'll have conversations about that. ODA has a process now, now that we have the funding, they starting environmental studies, so we're going to get more details as we go along, and we're happy to, to participate in making sure that we get the best bicycle facilities, the best sidewalks that we can get for the project.
That is good to hear. Because you mentioned that Broadway was our #1 bicycle crash corridor, so even though this, really only affects a small segment of that street, you feel it will significantly alleviate the risk.
Yeah, we talked a lot about crashes. I know there's a
Yeah.
higher concentration in this area just because of the way all the movements. But also, this is the tapping into other efforts. We have a Central City in Motion effort, and we're going to be looking at providing better infrastructure. So how can we tie these improvements to connect to the river? And then we have another project that hopefully will continue to improve Broadway and Wilder to the east to Hollywood. So that's sort of opportunities that we're kind of seeking to tap into.
Great, thank you.
Could I ask a question about the amendment? And I support congestion pricing, and I support Dan's efforts, Commissioner Saltzman's efforts. One possible hitch in all of this, who gets to decide that? Do we control that? Does the state control that? Or are we beholden to the federal government?
A little bit of all of those things. So as I understand it, the state would need to apply to the federal government for approval, and that's part of what the study that the state legislature directed ODOT Region 1 to undertake, is preparing a study of congestion pricing on I-5 and I-205 in order to apply for approval from the federal government to implement the program.
Okay, because the one concern I have, and again, I'll underscore it again, I support congestion pricing. I think it's absolutely the right strategy here, but I would hate to see all of the other aspects of this project go by the wayside and the funds returned to the state so they could use it to expand I-205 if the federal government doesn't give us what we need right now. And so, I'm somewhat hesitant to throw down a gauntlet when I don't know who's picking it up on the other side.
Sure. This, as an action item within the Central City Plan, is describing the intention and the directive to staff. So it's essentially telling us this is what our directive from you is to do. So it's saying this is what you want to see happen. It doesn't mean that the project can't happen if we don't meet that action. It's definitely what we want to see happen. Yeah.
Is that Commissioner Saltzman's intent? Because I'm not sure you got that
Our intention
right.
is to see that happen.
That is?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And our understanding,
We can let him speak.
Yeah,
then.
no, it's not my intention to,
Yeah.
I want to see this happen.
Yeah.
And I think you have to push the bureaucracy in order to make something like this happen, because it is a relatively new concept, at least certainly on the West Coast, it is a new concept.
Yeah.
But, I am fully cognizant of the fact that it may not happen before this project.
Right.
And I certainly don't want to see this project fall by the wayside
Okay,
because
well,
of that.
then you have me standing shoulder to shoulder with you on this. I think this is obviously an important project for the state. It's an important project for the city of Portland. I believe it has the opportunity to be transformational for this part of our city. And I am hearing the concerns that others have raised in their testimony. I think they raised some valid points, and there's opportunities, I believe, to address some of those concerns as well. So I certainly support it. I don't, does Dan need a second?
I'm
Yes.
happy to
Yes, he
second.
would need us.
Okay, Commissioner Fritz cleverly just jumped right in. She's good. So Commissioner Fritz seconds. I don't know if we have any further discussion on this.
There's just one other suggestion that I have in the longer of the two amendments that Commissioner Saltzman's put forward. If we could have some language in there about special attention to communities historically disadvantaged in Albina, to make it does say about equity, but I think we need to be really intentional, as we have in the North-Northeast housing strategy, to make sure that we're focusing on particularly black folks who lived in that area. And I don't have particular language for it. I'm sure it'll come back.
Yeah,
Assuming
formal
that's
amendments
okay
will
with
come later.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And
Very
one
good.
note specific to congestion pricing, we understand, we're working with the Commissioner's Office on bringing some further initiatives forward in the next month or so.
Right, I think November 30th.
November 30th will be.
Scheduled.
So our intention is to bring a much clearer point to the congestion pricing conversation about 6 weeks from now, right?
Right.
Right?
Right.
All right, next item.
Thank you.
And if anybody wants to take a break or anything at any point, just let me know.
No, they need to.
Oh.
I went through.
All right, so can you sit with me? I guess there's a procedural things for the things we did not discuss, whether,
Okay, so there are two other items on Table D. There's item 3 and item 4. And PBOT staff believe that these are minor, but we've grouped,
actually, we're talking 4 and,
I'm sorry, 4, 5, and 6, and then 7, 8, 9, and 10. So
Right.
do you want to talk about the street classifications?
I
Bruce?
did at the very beginning, let me see.
So,
So number 4 is about minor amendments to the emergency response classifications following conversations with the police and fire. So I think there are minor amendments and makes sense. 5 is to retain the bikeway classification for 18th Avenue. That's where, in Goose Hollow, that's where the tracks are. As a bicycle classification, it's hard to put a bicycle lane there, but it's actually, we're working, we're throwing some engineering there, and there's a possibility. It's a good connection. It's hard to find something equivalent, so we would like to retain it so we can explore that option. 6, minor mapping errors. They just, showed up, and we're correcting them. 7,
maybe you should stop there.
okay.
Do we have seconds for 5 or 6?
Second.
For 5 and 6?
For 4,
Okay.
5, and 6?
Yep.
Second,
I'm sorry,
second,
4.
second.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, 7 is basically a minor amendment that, a renaming of the project, Sullivan's Gulch Trail. We have a project to, provide a better pedestrian and bicycle connections on Lloyd Avenue in the Lloyd District, above the bluff. There's also a Sullivan's Gulch Trail project. In reality, the trail project called for the 2 alignments. So in a way, we're actually combining that TSP to reflect the 2 alignments. And there's a word, the new bridge that we're talking about, the view corridor. We're going to wrap around the design of this connection to the work that the bridge that work that we'll be doing as part of Sullivan's Crossing. And 8 is.
So I'll move any second on that?
Second.
Okay, that's on.
And the last one is a revised description for Southwest Bond Avenue to include the the South Waterfront street plan updates that I think came before you not too long ago.
Okay, I'll move. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, good.
So just to clarify, that was a motion and a second for 4 through 10, and the mayor was making all of the first motions.
Correct.
And then the second was, I think Carla got them, but, okay.
The mayor
first-
promised a more efficient government, and I think that you're seeing what that looks like.
Okay?
All right, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Troy Doss, Bureau of Plan and Sustainability. So I'm here to talk to you about the Table E and the zoning map and use allowance amendments. The first one is one for Volunteers of America. You may recall there was a request. They currently have industrial zoning, it's IG1. It's a site, though, that has been used historically for several decades as both a short-term housing facility for women who are recovering from addiction, as well as daycare. And daycare is somewhat associated with the other use, but it's also available to the public at large. Both operations are ran by Volunteers of America, who are a nonprofit. They had requested, that we rezone to EX, which would be a mixed-use zone, which would allow the use outright. However, because it's IG1, it's in the industrial sanctuary, there's a lot of concern from adjacent industrial uses, as well as the Centrally Sited Industrial Council, that we find a fix that would allow them to retain their use and maybe even expand. But if they should not follow through with that, we're not left with EX zone property that now has a plethora of other uses that could be allowed on the site that might erode the industrial sanctuary. So what we've come up with is a concept of a code amendment that would say, if the use is existing, operated by a nonprofit, it could continue and expand on site up to a floor area ratio of about 3 to 1. It would give them approximately 120,000 square feet of development potential. And they would be able to continue on.
And
Volunteers
that would not be subject to a conditional use.
It would not be subject to a conditional use.
But it would be limited to the life of the project. They couldn't do a bait and switch.
Exactly. And so they are assessing this proposal right now. They've given us a favorable review of it initially, but they look at it a little bit further, and we could work with them further to fine-tune that code.
Now, I spoke to some folks at the Centrally Sited Industrial Council, and my understanding, and you will tell me if I'm stating this accurately, is that they are supportive of the concept. They were just uncomfortable with one of the proposed fixes.
They were uncomfortable with the zone change.
The zone change.
So if we could find a way to retain the current zoning and the protections it comes with, while also allowing VOA to expand.
But they're not opposed to the proposed use of the site?
Nope, not at all.
Of VOA developing it for a community purpose?
Very supportive, in fact.
My view is whatever gets us to the finish line that brings the most people along, that allows them to leverage a piece of property for a significant community benefit. And if it's the staff recommendation and it's acceptable to all the parties, that's fine with me, and I appreciate your creative problem solving here.
I would move that amendment.
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. And I understand part of this is that you'll continue to work further with VOA and CEIC on the code to make this a possibility.
And
It
we'll
sounds like
bring back the
both parties
specifics.
are interested in doing that, which is great. And I
Yes.
appreciate your work on that, too.
All right.
Good. Next item.
Next item is really a combination of number 2 and 3 here, and it deals with it's the same provision in the code. We have historically had a limitation on large format retail in certain locations of the city, parts of the North Pearl, South Waterfront, and this idea was also extended over to the OMSI station area, really trying to prevent a use that was, akin to like a Costco that's very large in volume, lots of tracks a lot of trips. And because we just don't believe the transportation system is able of carrying that. However, we have found that over time, the limitation at 40,000 square feet is pretty limited. That's smaller than some grocery stores. So the request has been to allow up to 50,000 square feet, both in South Waterfront and at the OMSI area. And honestly, we would extend that to the other areas where this is applicable. And then you could apply up to 60,000 square feet as a conditional use. We've talked briefly with both parties. They're comfortable with an amendment that would do something like that. They've actually requested that. So that's where we're at on this one.
Very good. I'll move that. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. That's E2 and 3. E4?
E4 is, actually, I'm going to turn this one over to Commissioner Daly, who had a proposed amendment on T1.
Thank you, Troy. Colleagues, I have a number of talking points I'm going to run through. I think they may answer most of your questions, and then we'll do our best to answer any follow-ups. So I offered this rezoning amendment to help activate the large concrete pier that is along the North Pearl Riverfront. The pier is currently barely used, and one of the goals of the Central City Plan is to activate the riverfront for a variety of activities, so that is the intent of this amendment. We were contacted by an individual who has a grand vision of bringing a flotel to this pier. It may very well be that that is not possible, but certainly changing the zoning could enable a variety of other activities, whether it's boat rides from the pier, kayaks, food, beverage, performances, et cetera. So regardless of what actually happens there, we're just wanting to open up the possibility of something more happening there. So the current zoning is high-density residential, and it allows some commercial development, but that must be in the primary residential structure. Rezoning to a central commercial works fine for the existing condominium residential developments and allows more flexibility for development of retail uses on these sites. Item E4 is the amendment. It will include 3 tax lots, 2 properties that are, thanks for the visuals, by the way. I feel so fancy. 2 properties that are adjacent to the pier and 1 rectangular site by the inlet to the north. The 3rd property would become an isolated residentially zoned site if the 2 properties adjacent to the pier were the only sites rezoned to central commercial. Also, to clarify, the amendment applies CX to the comprehensive plan map and the zoning map for these properties. Since I proposed this amendment at the September 7th City Council hearing, I plan to reach out to affected property owners and others who might be interested in the amendment, including the Pearl District and Northwest Industrial Associations. My staff is working with BPS staff to do that community outreach and send them formal notification of this map amendment prior to the January public hearing. That's all I've got.
Commissioner, I cannot support taking scarce industrial land out of our inventory. I'm sorry. Of course, this is not Terminal 1 North, this is Terminal 1 South, and it's already zoned for residential. So the only question here is, there's a lot of staff comments here about an open house and notice. So is that because this will be a surprise to the neighbors, or this is required, or what?
I think the individual I mentioned that has the interest in the pier has actually done his own outreach, so they should be aware that there's interest in this, but we have not done it ourselves.
We will be sending a notice prior to the January public hearing, so we will send them to those neighbors.
So I'll second this so that we can have further discussion.
And staff will work with Commissioner Daly on the specific language around the amendment. Is that correct? Correct. Good. Very good. Excellent. Next item, please.
Okay, we're going to go back to Ivon Street. And there's actually two issues that are listed here. So I'll start with 5. I don't really have a slide on this, but it's really a minor amendment. As we were going through the process of addressing the retail limitation I discussed earlier, we had inserted an exemption that would allow hotel uses to be allowed despite the retail limitation of 40,000 or 50,000 square feet, because hotels are listed as a retail sales and service use under the code. We meant to carry that over. It was a mistake. It's an error in the code that's before you today, so we're just asking that we can re-amend that language to allow hotels where that limitation exists, and that would also allow for a hotel at Ivon Street, for instance.
I'll move it.
Second?
Very good.
And then the last is for the same property. There was a request that, by the property owner, that why don't we allow housing as conditional use here the same way we did at OMSI? So just to give you a little background on that, OMSI has currently a zoning pattern that's an employment / industrial zone that does allow housing as conditional use. And there was a lot of conversation when we brought the Southeast Quadrant Plan through to say, should we retain that or not? So the proposal from both going through Planning Commission and City Council was for the OMSI area, because the zoning currently allows it as conditional use, we're going to retain that going forward. So that's why we've done that there. The properties south of the station area there, the light rail station at Carruthers, are not zoned the same way. They're actually zoned heavy industrial. And if you see the photo here, you'll see that's the use that's currently there. It's the Ross Island Sand and Gravel Batch Plant. The area also has warehouses and other uses, but primarily it's really zoned for heavy industrial. So we are rezoning the area to allow EX, central commercial, or central employment, sorry, and would allow virtually every use that the code allows except for residential. And the reason we're doing that is there's some transportation impacts on the adjacent industrial use, which will retain its IH zoning, the Ross Island Sand and Gravel. Could impact freight operations. It also cuts right across the trailhead for Springwater OMSI Trail. And it just doesn't seem like a site that is appropriate for housing. But there's so much flexibility still retained in the EX zoning itself that we felt that they were able to go forward with a number of different development scenarios there. So our proposal would be to retain the prohibition on housing at that site.
How long has the current property owner owned that land?
About 4 years.
And so the property was acquired with these existing limitations?
Yes.
And from your point of view, is this a close call or a clear call?
I believe it's a clear call.
Joe?
It's a clear call. The property was purchased as industrial. We're widely expanding the kind of uses that could go on it. We're just not going with residential, because the policies we're balancing here are protecting the industrial sanctuary, centrally side, but hooking this property into the innovation quadrant and offering, offices and other kind of uses. So it's a clear call from the public benefit of the policy purpose for us as well. And residential here, for those reasons and others, is not appropriate at this time.
I think this is my amendment, but I agree with the rationales that have been offered.
Thanks. Okay.
We down to one more?
This is it.
Yep.
Green buildings.
Mindy Brooks, Planning and Sustainability, and we're going to talk about eco-roofs. It's our last item for today, I believe. So this was already brought up as an amendment by Commissioner Udaly and seconded, but we wanted to give you an update on where we are on this. And I wanted to give a little bit of background, too, to make sure that everyone understands what the standard would be. So this is a standard for new buildings over 20,000 square feet. The current recommended draft would have 60% of the rooftop going to eco-roof after you remove mechanical fire safety routes, all other things on the rooftop. The remaining 60% would need to be an eco-roof. And I wanted to clarify that 20,000 square feet, that is the size of the whole building, not the footprint, not the rooftop, the whole building. So a half-block site, 2 stories equals 20,000 square feet. So it's going to pick up most new buildings in the central city. The way that it would work is, I just picked a recent development. All that gray area on that rooftop there is mechanical and fire evacuation routes and HVAC, and all that stuff would be removed first from the calculation, and then the remaining area would be where you'd look at for an eco-roof. So the recommendation before you, Daley's amendment, was 60% of that would go to eco-roof and 40% could be used for other amenity spaces. So just an example of this, in this example, the towers are all the mechanical space, no eco-roof, and then that podium there has eco-roof plus amenity space, like this. Commissioner Udaley's amendment would change the coverage to 100% of the remaining rooftop area, and then clarifying the issue around amenity space. So really, the standard would work very similar to the way that we've written it today. It's more of a clarification about what we are calling common outdoor area. So instead of it being flexible, we would say, take your rooftop, subtract mechanical, fire safety, and common outdoor area, and then the rest needs to be eco-roof, 100% into eco-roof. So that is what we're looking at. We don't have an amendment today because we've run into 2 topics that we have to address further. One is the fire code, which was amended in 2016 to specify size and dimension of eco-roof. So we're looking further into how do we address that and maximize eco-roof space. And then the other has to do with architectural diversity. So eco-roofs per our stormwater code can go up to a slope of about 25%. Beyond that, it's a little bit tricky. And so we're trying to figure out how we can be flexible so we don't end up with just flat roofs on our new buildings. So we're hoping to come back soon with an actual amendment that gets at those 2 issues as well.
All right, before you go to the second part of this, I'm just looking at the Udaley amendment where you have a recommendation on 1 through 4. So historically, BES has had a big role in eco-roof. So based on the clarifications that you've worked out and the issue, and I see there's still a couple things to be clarified, but does BES support this approach now?
Yeah, so there's a staff that includes a team of BES, Bureau of Development Services, and our bureau to continue to make sure that it meets everybody's, and with Bureau of Development Services, we're also working with fire as well. So make sure everybody's
On the same page?
on the same page, yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
And then you're also looking more to historic buildings and smaller ones, right?
Our current recommendation is to not go to a smaller size than 20,000 square feet. We think that picks up most of the stock of what will be new buildings in the central city.
What is an example, and I agree with you that it's appropriate for us to look at incentives. The incentive used to be that you get a bonus. We tied it to the zoning code, right? Now we're creating a mandate. So what's an example of an incentive that could be considered by the council?
Well, there was a greater green incentive that was, it was Sam Adams' incentive that he put in place, and it was through Bureau of Environmental Services to help offset the cost of eco-roofs. And I don't have the stats with me right now, but quite a few eco-roofs were funded as part of that greater green incentive. So a monetary offset would be one option you could look at.
Right. So that was using a subsidy program at BES to cover it, and unlikely that's going to come back. So there might be other things that can be offered as
I'm sorry, I missed something. Incentives for smaller buildings or for existing buildings, or it's not?
When it wasn't a mandate,
Oh, okay.
then Commissioner Adams proposed using ratepayer subsidies to cover an offset. Probably not the best idea for us to pursue that option going forward. So the question is, what
But
are,
why would we need incentives if we're going to require something?
we're talking about the
That's-
smaller footprint.
Okay,
the smaller
great,
buildings.
okay. That's what
And
I
so I was
looking
just
for.
asking, I was hoping to be educated about what are examples of incentives when you don't have the zoning code and you don't have ratepayer dollars, what's left?
Well, and you
Warm
don't
fuzzies.
have bonuses in this case because the system's fully subscribed. So it's our other fee waivers, speeding things up
Yeah.
kind of approaches, but nothing that we've identified specifically
And
yet.
something, presumably, we're talking to some of those property owners to ask, what would they view as an appropriate incentive?
We have not done that as part of this, but can follow up
But
on that.
we're carving this out, so, I mean, we'll get some feedback as to
Okay.
what they're looking for.
Well, possibly this would help with the energy rating, which we're requiring, because it would, having more stuff on the top makes it cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter.
Oh, yeah, how could this tie into the green building policy we just heard today?
I think these are all good questions, and thank you, Commissioner Daly, for raising this whole
Yeah.
topic, because I think it is one, obviously, staff has enjoyed digging into it more. I know you've had a lot of conversations with
Yeah.
Audubon, so thank you very much.
But
So eco-roofs are part of the green building policy, and they're in place today. We actually modeled a lot of the recommended code out of the green building policy, because as you pointed out, there are many reasons, not just stormwater reasons, to look at eco-roofs. They do decrease HVAC costs. They have they extend the life of a roof almost twice over what a standard roof is. So there's a lot of reasons to consider eco-roof, and monetary reasons as well for the property owner.
I think the concern you flagged, which I share, is on some of the smaller buildings, particularly historic structures, where we're talking about a whole host of changes that are going to add up. We want to assess the cost, the cumulative impact, and then see whether there's some way to offset that cost so that someone isn't getting a unreinforced masonry bill, an eco roof mandate, and a few other things. And
So just to be clear, as this is proposed right now, it would apply only to new construction. So this is not,
I'm
there
talking
isn't
about 5
yet.
through 7.
Yeah, I don't believe that the 5 through 7 was looking at retrofit.
Well, it says as well as retrofitting existing rooftops, so I'm just going off your language.
Oh,
The last
I'm
sentence.
sorry, which one are you looking at?
So,
Oh, underneath of staff comments.
yeah, hedge your bet on that.
Oh,
one.
yes,
Just
off of staff comments,
give your-
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was looking at number 5 here. The request this came from Grit, and the request was to apply it to new construction. But yeah, there's.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, okay.
All right. That's it? Good. So Sally, why don't you tell us where we are with regard to the items we're going to cover in our next session?
Okay, on November 2nd, we will talk about the West Quadrant SAC property owner map again. But then we will be moving on to a number of other topics, including river and environmental items, and, gosh, I don't have them all in front of me.
And others.
And the
And a
rest.
number of others.
Right, and
so-
the rest.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to point out the schedule. So we have on the calendar November 2nd and December 6th to go through a variety of items, just like we did today, and develop amendments in time for the January 18th public hearing. We will schedule another date in probably March to do some final votes and on the amendments, and then we will likely come back to you in May for a final council vote, because that is currently when the comprehensive plan is scheduled to be complete.
Can I-
So we need to follow that.
Is November 2nd locked in stone? Did you say November 2nd for the next,
I did say November 2nd.
I'm just looking where it's on my, I don't see
Is it
on-
November 2nd or November 6th? I
It's
have,
November 2nd and December 6th.
okay.
Well, it's not on,
My notes were different.
it's not on our calendar.
Well, these are for work sessions for the council, right? So I would suggest that we move it so that we accommodate your schedule.
I was just going to ask if there's any way to move it to the following week.
not really, there's,
Or
it's
Carlo, we
pretty
jammed?
booked. It's pretty booked, yeah. There isn't time.
Even on a Tuesday morning work session time?
There's a work session a Wednesday morning, that's the Wednesday evening meeting, and then the Thursday is booked from 2 to 4.
So right
to 2 to
now,
3:30.
But what about the Tuesdays where we kind of keep it held for work sessions coming up? Is there nothing there?
That week, the following week of the 2nd, there's a work session on the 7th, 9:30 to 11:30.
well, maybe we could just after, in the next 24 hours, see if there's a place that fits. If there's a way to move it to the next week that doesn't inconvenience my colleagues, I would ask us to consider it. If not, then we'll keep the date.
Let's see if we can work it out. So we'll have,
So
Do
it
we
does
need to
need to
announce
be
it today?
rolled to a date and time certain.
then we can change
Should
it,
be
right?
announced today. I'm sorry for that, it's a technicality, but because it is a land use matter,
can we
presumably
announce it today
someone-
and then change it? What's the process for changing?
yeah,
dates?
so we can announce today that the date and time certain is November 2nd. On November, if it's going to be rescheduled for a date and time certain after November 2nd, we can post on the door and post online the new time.
Okay, so let's do this. For those listening in, we're going to continue this conversation on November 2nd at what time?
2 PM.
At 2 PM, but heads up,
It
we
might
will
change
very
again.
likely be changing that date. So stay tuned between
Yeah.
now and then and check the council agenda to see if we've changed the date.
And
And
how much
ev-
time do you expect for this next work session?
So I had the moment to go grab my materials here. So we have a couple of other green building items.
What's your guesstimate if you added it all? up?
3 hours.
Okay, that's good. Good to know.
All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.